بارون. دكتورة نانسي بارون حاصلة على دكتوراه من جامعة ماساتشوستس في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية في علم النفس الإرشادي، وتعمل منذ عام 89 في تصميم وتطوير والتدريب على برامج الصحة النفسية والدعم النفسي الاجتماعي في منظمات عدة في الأمم المتحدة ومنظمات غير حكومية عبر عدة بلدان من العالم. ومنذ عام 2008 كما تحب أن تصف ذلك أنها جعلت من مصر وطنها وأسست معهد للتدريب والخدمات النفسية والاجتماعية في القاهرة بستيك ويعمل معها فريق يزيد عن 150 من اللاجئين والمهاجرين الموجودين في مصر لتقديم دعم نفسي تخصصي من خلال الفصل الساكن على مدار الساعة في المنازل في المجتمع اللاجئين والمهاجرين في مصر. جزء من الحركة الدولية للهلال الأحمر والصليب الأحمر هو اعتبار الصحة النفسية أحد الركائز سواء للعاملين أو المتطوعين بالحركة، وكذلك أيضا كل أفراد المجتمع. من المنطق ده أو المنطلق ده حابين نسأل الدكتورة نانسي بارون من خبرات حضرتك في العمل في المستوى الدولي والمستوى الإقليمي، ليه بنعتبر الصحة النفسية مهمة في مجال العمل الإنساني والتنموي؟
So good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and particularly a pleasure to have been invited to speak on this panel for mental health. Often we speak about other things, but rarely do we have the opportunity to speak about mental health. Before coming to Egypt now 14 years ago, I know I should be speaking in Arabic, but I'm not, I had the good fortune of working internationally and working across the globe in programming, setting up mental health and psychosocial support in countries throughout Africa and Asia. And I had the good fortune of being engaged in the development of the international guidelines on mental health and psychosocial support. In 2007, it became really clear about how important MHPSS, mental health and psychosocial support, was for development work. And as people began to realize that, it became necessary to set up designs of how to be able to set this up. What we all realized was that, in fact, development work that only dealt with basics, food, shelter, water, and sanitation, was not enough. All right? We all know that the first stress that anybody feels in an emergency is how am I going to survive? And therefore, all those basic needs are first level. But emergencies have other consequences. They have consequences about self-esteem, self-worth. They have consequences about people losing trust in other people and losing trust maybe in their society, their government, their environment. So what becomes important then is that we learn that mental health and psychosocial interventions were critical to everyone to be able to manage what was happening. And most people don't become mentally ill because of an emergency or because of the need for development, but they do have the stresses that come from the experience itself. What we learned in the development of interventions is that we start with basics. We help people to alleviate stress by providing basics. And then we recognize that there are interventions needed for families and communities to help support people so that in fact those levels of stress are managed, so that people actually can do the development they need. And without some of those interventions, then people don't have the development or don't move forward with the development of the future as much as one would like them to be able to do. Is that we realize that very few people actually need the counseling, the professional mental health care, fortunately. They're small numbers, but they're essential. And so what we learned is that it's important that in fact we provide the basic services so that we alleviate the stress that comes from the initial parts of an emergency, that we help to support family and community systems so that in fact that they take care of their own people and that they're able to manage the stress that also comes from the environment, and that we set up specialized care, both in counseling as well as in mental health care, in order to help those people who have more serious problems. Thank you.
شكرا دكتورة نانسي على الخطوات اللي قدمتها. يعني حابب اسالك سريعا اهم النقاط اللي تعرضت ليها والحديث عن اهميه وجود جايد لاينز او معايير واضحه للتدخلات في الصحه النفسيه. وزي ما وضحت الموضوع مش بس مرتبط بحوالي نفسيه، ممكن حوالي بيولوجيه ونفسيه واجتماعيه. وكل ما بدانا ب يعني الخدمات الاساسيه او وفرنا خدمات الدعم النفسي الاساسي، كل ما كان سهل علينا بعد كده متابعه الحالات اللي محتاج او تقليل عدد الحالات المحتاجه رعايه متخصصه، واكدت ايضا على ده هيقلل كتير من الاحتياج للخدمات المتخصصه دي في ظل الشورتج او النقص الرهيب في الخدمات المتوفره. وخليني اسالك هنا دكتور نانسي، هل تعتقدي ان تقنيات الرعايه الذاتيه اللي احنا دايما بننصح بيها المستفيدين في خدماتنا هي ايضا مهمه للمتطوعين والعاملين في مجال الانساني سواء في مجال الصحه النفسيه او غيره، وليه هي مهمه وغيره؟ اتفضلي.
Thank you. You know, if I'm a carpenter, I need to have a good hammer. If I get up on a roof and I start to work and my hammer breaks and it collapses, falls in half. And half of it goes flying in one direction and half of it goes flying in the other direction. I could hurt myself, I could hurt someone else. MHPSS workers are both the carpenter and the hammer. They can't afford to break the hammer, right? That keeping that hammer whole, keeping themselves whole, is essential to be able to do their work. MHPSS workers, I have a whole team of workers here, listen to the horrors of people's lives. They witness it, they listen to it, they experience it. And with that, have to have tremendous compassion. We don't want MHPSS workers that have distance from people. We want them to feel compassion. We want them to understand. We want them to offer empathy. And as they do that, and as they feel for other people, it can have tremendous impact on themselves. And it should. Because if it doesn't, then frankly, they're probably not very good workers. The question is, though, is that what do they need, right? Because what they need is essential. They have to be able to get support for themselves. If a hammer breaks and we use crazy glue to glue it back together again, right, it's not sturdy, it's likely to break again. So we can't do that with MHPS workers. We don't want to break the hammer. We don't want them to burn out. The goal is to try to prevent that. The goal is to understand their feelings, to understand how difficult it is, and to try to set up systems that protect them, prevent that kind of breakdown or problem, and help them to feel appreciated. Appreciated is the bottom line. I think that organizations have a responsibility for workers to feel appreciated, for them to feel that they're valuable, for them to feel that in fact the hard work that they do at Pstic 24 hours a day is appreciated, that they feel good that what they do actually accomplishes something. I think MHPSS workers need the support of family and friends and the society in general. So I think today, you know, it's really important that we're talking about MHPSS. We're talking about it not only for the general public, but we're making sure that we're talking about it for our workers as well. What workers need is to be able to create balance. That balance between being a good, kind, compassionate worker and also being able to take care of themselves so that their own lives have happiness and joy, right? And that their own lives are able to feel fulfilled, both in their work and outside. Balance. Balance is key. Thank you.
شكرا دكتور نانسي على الايضاح الوافي وتاكيدها على اهميه ان احنا محتاجين نسمع، مش بس نسمع لأجسامنا، نسمع لعقولنا، نسمع لقلوبنا، وان احنا حقنا نشعر بالالم والتعب زي الباقيين، وان احنا محتاجين دايما نحافظ على ده حتى لو احنا العاملين اللي بننصح بيه، حتى لو احنا اللي بننصح ده دايما الناس. وكانت ايضا على المسؤوليه مش بس احنا افراد مسؤوليه المؤسسات اللي احنا عارفين ايضا كانت الدكتوره امل بتوضح من شويه. يمكن انا عندي اول سؤال من الجمهور حابب اقول للدكتور نانسي، في حد بيسال هل احنا في احتياج زياده عدد القادرين على تطبيق خدمات الدعم النفسي الاوليه وتحديدا في فئه الاباء والامهات؟
Is there a need to increase it? Is the question? Yeah? Well, there's always the need to increase it. You know, you're asking specifically about mothers and fathers, and you know, the world is filled with lots of problems these days. You know, and COVID added new problems, and the environment is adding new problems, and the stresses of the economy adds new problems. So I think that parents are always doing kind of the best they can But can they use more support? Well, of course. I think there's lots of ways to do support, though. I mean, not everybody needs to go to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I think most people need the support that comes from families and communities and actual empathy for each other, listening to each other, understanding what each other's feeling and talking to each other. I think that people need to listen to grandma. They need to listen to the uncles. They need to listen to each other. And that's how parents get lots and lots of the support they need. They need to admit when they're tired. You know, they need to, when the kid is just hard for them, they don't know what to do next, and they need to talk about it. So, I think, yes, parents need more support, but that doesn't necessarily have to come from professionals. It can come from an understanding inside society that people need to help each other.
شكرا جدا دكتور نانسي. زي ما دكتور نانسي بتاكد ان احنا دايما في احتياج طبعا لمقدمين خبرات اكتر، بس وخاصه في الاداء والامهات، بس هم زي ما احنا محتاجين نزود المتخصصين، زي ما احنا محتاجين نستفيد من المصادر اللي عندنا، وان هم يعني نحاول نقدم تعليم اكتر.
بما انك حضرتك طبيبه متخصصه في مجال الصحه النفسيه، احنا عندنا في العلاج او المجالات العلاجيه بنقول ان احنا عندنا طبيب لكل 2000 اسره، او بنقول ان في ممارس عام لكل 2000 اسره، فاحنا عندنا في نسبه بنحسب فيها عدد المعالج النفسي، مش هنقول هو طبيب نفسي، طبيب نفسي ايه نسبه؟ المعالج النفسي اللي بيقدر يتعامل مع المجتمع باسلوب بسيط. هل في نسبه عالميه موجوده ان احنا محتاجين مثلا معالج او مقدم خدمات الدعم النفسي للمجتمع؟ شكرا.
That's a hard question. The numbers or the ratio between the numbers of mental health support that you need for a population, I can't tell you that I know what the general number is. What I can talk about, though, is emergency care. And there's been a fair amount of research that's been done. What happens after a natural disaster? What happens after a war? What happens after violence? And people have done research about, what are the mental health and psychological consequences, and thereby how much help is needed. Initially, I think people thought that there would be a higher number of people who would be mentally ill. That's not true. That in fact, it's a small number of people who, because of an emergency, become severely mentally ill. The large part of the population is highly stressed. So what we would say is immediately after an emergency, probably everybody is feeling high levels of distress and stress because of the situation. Then there's interventions. At the basic needs, good portion of people, if you help them to feed their children, their level of stress comes down, right? That's fine for the general population, right? So they don't all need mental health care, they often need basics. Right? You then have a percentage of the population who just needs better family and community support, right? So that might be another percentage of the population. I think the population that you're asking about are those that might need counseling or mental health care. Counseling is psychologists, social workers, maybe life coaches, people like that. Okay, these are people that are offering support, and a support that is not being met by family and community. Usually in an emergency, people talk about maybe 15 to 20% of a population that could use something. Right? It could be groups, it could be better awareness raising, it could be better information, it could be counseling. Right? But let's say 15 to 20% of the population. For seriously mentally ill folks, all right, what we know is worldwide, the percentages of people with major disorders like schizophrenia, as an example, might be somewhere between 2 to 3 to 4% of any population. No emergency. That's just the general numbers, because much of mental health has a biological component. So if you add an emergency, all right, then maybe that serious number goes up 1%. Maybe 2%. If people have suffered terrible things, it might go up more, but it's not an outrageous amount of the population. So we might suggest that somewhere around 3 to 4 to 5% of a population that's been severely affected by an emergency might need more serious mental health care.
دكتور نانسي على الطرح. يمكن حابب اكد دايما على الفكره اللي هي بتطرحها، وهي متوافقه ايضا مع يعني بنسميها هرم التدخلات الخاص بالحركه الدوليه للصحه النفسيه، وكذلك برضه الفكره اللي طرحتها منظمه الصحه العالميه اخيرا، ان احنا نوجه اغلب تدخلاتنا للتدخلات الاقل حده، لان عدد فعلا اللي بيطوروا الاضطرابات الشديده او الاحتياج للطبيب النفسي والعلاج النفسي هم الاقل دايما. زي ما كانت بتاكد في الطوارئ دايما يمكن الاكثر، يعني كل الناس بتكون مضغوطه وده الطبيعي بتاع وقت الطوارئ، بس قليل جدا اللي هيحتاج بعد كده متابعه متخصص، لكن الكل هيحتاج دعم واسعافات اوليه نفسيه واحيانا بعض الاستشارات، ودي حاجات اللي بنأكد ان هي بنحاول نخليها في مستويات اقل عشان ينفع غير المختص غير الطبيب يقدمها، وده متماشي مع سياسات منظمه الصحه العالميه زي ما كانت زميلنا بيشرح من شويه، فكره برنامج رأي الفجوه بتاع NHK وبرنامج الBM+، وهي برامج بيقدمها غير اطباء اساسا عشان تساعد على سد الاحتياج ده اللي هو بالاساس موجه للضغوط، التعامل مع الضغوط في وقت الازمات، وليس الاضطرابات النفسيه اللي هي نسبتها بتبقى ما بتعديش 1 2 3 في اسوء الحالات في المية.